All right, today we are diving into one of history's most complicated and, frankly, terrifying figures, Ivan IV of Russia. You probably know him as Ivan the Terrible, but was he really the visionary architect who dragged Russia into the modern age? Or was he a paranoid tyrant who nearly drowned his own empire in blood? Let's get into it.
So right off the bat, here's the central problem with Ivan. On one hand, you have the nation builder. This is the guy who was first crowned Tsar of all Russia, who literally doubled the size of his country, and who created a single, standardized legal code for everyone. I mean, impressive stuff. But then, there's the other side. The monster. The man who created the Oprichnina, his own private terror squad, who unleashed hell on his own people, and, in a moment of fury, killed his own son. How can one person be both of these things?
You know, to really understand the tyrant, you first have to meet the visionary. In that story, it starts with a childhood that would shape and honestly haunt his entire life.
Ivan's early life was, and there's no other way to put it, a crucible of trauma. Just imagine, his father dies when he's only 3 years old. Then his mother, who was ruling in his place, dies suddenly when he's 8, and everyone whispers it was poison. So now this little kid is an orphan, and he's basically a pawn for the powerful noble families, the boyars. For almost a decade, he was neglected, abused, and forced to watch as these guys plundered the country and murdered each other. This forged a deep, burning hatred for the aristocracy that he would carry forever. So when he's finally crowned at 16, he's not just some new king. He's a survivor, and he has a mission.
The young Ivan immediately gets to work, launching a wave of reforms to modernize Russia and, more importantly, to centralize power in his own hands. Before him, justice was basically whatever your local lord said it was. The Sudebnik of 1550 changed that, creating one legal system for everyone, which was a huge blow to the corrupt nobles. But his real game changer? The Streltsy. Think about this. Before Ivan, armies were loyal to their local lords. The Streltsy was a professional, paid, standing army whose only loyalty was to the Tsar. That single move just shattered the military power of the old families. He even created a new assembly, the Zemsky Sobor, to give a voice to merchants and lesser nobles, cleverly bypassing the old guard.
And his ambition didn't stop at home. For centuries, Russia had been playing defense against the Tatar Khanates to the east. Ivan, he went on the attack. The conquests of Kazan and Astrakhan were absolutely staggering victories. They gave Russia control of the entire Volga River, a trade superhighway, and transformed the country from a vulnerable kingdom into a sprawling, multi-ethnic empire. He was a true architect of power.
But this golden era of reform and expansion, it came to a screeching, violent halt. A series of devastating personal and political crises sent Ivan spiraling into a paranoia from which he and all of Russia would never really recover.
It was like a 1-2-3 punch. First, he gets bogged down in the incredibly costly and difficult Livonian War. Then, the absolute anchor of his life, his wife Anastasia, dies suddenly. Ivan was utterly convinced the boyars had poisoned her, and all those traumatic fears from his childhood came rushing back. The final straw? His best friend and top general, Prince Korzybski, betrays him and defects to the enemy. For Ivan, this confirmed his deepest, darkest paranoia. He was surrounded by traitors, and everything he'd built was a lie.
So this psychological break, it didn't just stay in his head. Oh no, he institutionalized it. He turned his paranoia into a weapon of state terror. And this is where Ivan truly earns the name, the Terrible.
In what has to be one of the most brilliant and terrifying political moves ever, Ivan just abdicates. He packs up and leaves Moscow. The city descends into total chaos. The people, terrified of going back to the anarchy of his childhood, literally beg him to return. And he agrees, but with one chilling condition: that he be given absolute power to create his own personal domain, the Oprichnina, where he could hunt down and destroy traitors with zero legal oversight.
He literally split his own country in two. You had the Zemshchina, which was the rest of Russia, run by the usual government, but then you had the Oprichnina, his private kingdom, carved from the wealthiest lands in the country. It was a state within a state, operating completely outside the law, and its only purpose was to carry out his brutal will.
And his enforcers were the Oprichniki. I mean, just look at these symbols. Talk about terrifying. They dressed in black robes like twisted monks. They rode with a severed dog's head tied to their saddle to sniff out treason, and a broom to sweep traitors from the land. This was his private death squad, and they systematically hunted and destroyed the old noble families, executing thousands and seizing all their land. The brutality just escalated, reaching its absolute peak in 1570 at the massacre of Novgorod. Ivan became convinced that this prosperous city was planning to defect to the enemy, so he led his Oprichniki on a month-long rampage of torture and murder. Modern estimates suggest that as many as 15,000 people were killed.
You see, his paranoia didn't just consume his enemies. In the end, it consumed his own future. In 1581, during a furious argument, Ivan struck his oldest son and heir with his heavy iron-tipped staff. The blow killed him. In that single moment of uncontrolled rage, he didn't just murder his son, he destroyed his own dynasty and basically set Russia on a collision course with chaos and civil war.
So after the empire building and the unimaginable bloodshed, how in the world do people remember this guy today? Well, as you can probably guess, his legacy is a fierce, fierce battleground.
Believe it or not, in the 20th century, Joseph Stalin saw Ivan as a personal hero. He famously said Ivan's only mistake was not being cruel enough to wipe out all his enemies. Stalin even commissioned a whole film celebrating Ivan as this strong, necessary leader who did what had to be done for the good of the state.
But today, that view is hugely controversial. When the first ever monument to Ivan was put up in 2016, critics were outraged. They called it an attempt to glorify autocracy and promote a made-up concept of Russia that celebrates brutal state power while completely whitewashing the memory of his victims.
And this is really why Ivan's story still matters so much. The fight over his legacy gets to the very heart of a core tension in Russian history and its identity. That constant, difficult struggle between the need for a strong, centralized state and the enormous human cost that so often comes with it.
So that leaves us with this final nagging question. How should a nation remember a founder who was, without a doubt, both a visionary builder and a terrifying monster? It's a question that historians and Russia itself are still grappling with, centuries later.